Hey everyone, and welcome to another video. Tonight we have 2 hours of horror stories. I hope you all enjoy them. If you do, please be sure to drop a like rating. Let's see if we can reach 1,000 likes on this one. Liking the video lets me know I'm doing a good job, it helps more people see the content, and it's also just very appreciated. Another thing that is very appreciated is subscribing if you are new. I post content just like this all of the time, so if this is your kind of thing, if you like these 2 hours of uninterrupted horror stories, I put out videos just like this one as often as I can. Anyways, sit back, do whatever it is that you do to relax, enjoy the 2 hours of uninterrupted horror stories right after the ad break after this intro. There won't be any more ad breaks after that one. And as always, I hope you all have a great night. This is something I should probably be speaking about with a therapist. I know, I would, or I have been, but that's not really an option anymore. In fact, I couldn't tell you how many times I've told this story to various medical professionals. I'm 30 now, 20 years since it happened. I just want it to stop. I was a pretty average kid, I think. A little weird, but every kid is a little weird. I had an older sister, and we fought like two cats. I had a couple good friends, most of whom lived on my street or one street over, and we would meet after school and play until it was time for dinner. My life was fairly ideal. I played soccer, I think. Honestly, I have a lot of trouble remembering much of my childhood. But I remember that I got a Nintendo DS for my 10th birthday, and we had a big party in the backyard. Practically the whole neighborhood showed up. My birthday was just before school got out for the summer, so the air buzzed with excitement, and the evening was warm and felt more alive than other nights. The grown-ups started a fire in our little fire pit, and they sat around it and drank beer until we ran around. I was allowed to stay up past when I usually went to bed, and the other kids chased fireflies with me and roasted marshmallows until late. I remember going to bed happy, excited for summer, and exhausted. I fell asleep quickly. The peel and stick glow in the dark, stars and moons shining on the ceiling above my head. Waking up the day after my birthday, something felt off. I couldn't put my finger on it. I hadn't had a nightmare. Wasn't that. I had slept better than I could really remember ever sleeping. It was late, I realized. That must be it. My mom usually woke me up around 8 if it wasn't a school day. She said it was a good habit to be in the routine of waking up early and starting your day on the right foot. By the light streaming in from my windows and the slightly muggy heat in the room, I figured it was already 10 a.m. or so. I smiled, sliding out of bed. It must have been one final birthday treat, letting me sleep in. She had let me sleep in the day before, too, of course, although on my birthday itself, I had wanted to get up as early as possible. "Mom?" I called out into the hallway, poking my head out the door. No answer. I frowned. It was Saturday, so my dad was definitely already at work, but my mom wouldn't be. My sister wouldn't be home either. She had left the night before to spend the night at her friend's house. She was 13 now, and allowed to have sleepovers, for which I was eternally jealous. I decided she must be out front in the garden. I put on a shirt and left my room. I smelled coffee, but there was none left in the pot. There were dishes in the sink, too, with remnants of eggs stuck to a pan. It wasn't necessarily alarming, but it was strange. Even on days I slept in, there was always breakfast left over for me. I opened the front door, opening my mouth to call out to my mom, but I instantly froze. Halfway up our walkway was the mailman. He was on the ground, sprawled out awkwardly on the cement. Fresh blood pooled beneath him in a gruesome splatter. I didn't know what to do. I couldn't move. His limbs were bent at horrible angles. His face pointed away from me. It almost looked like something, some omnipotent force, had lifted him into the air and then slammed him back down. The package he must have been delivering lay a few feet away, the cardboard dented and soaked in red. I didn't need any confirmation he was dead. It wasn't a question. I had never seen a dead person before. Sometimes my parents had watched horror movies, but that hardly counted. I backed into the house and closed the door behind me. My mind was racing too fast, and my heart felt like it might burst out of my chest. Everything in my body was reeling, so much so that all I could do was move slowly, in a false sense of calm. "Mom?" I called out again, into the silent house, my voice breaking. "Mom, are you home? Something happened outside. Mom?" No one answered. The house felt way too quiet. All I could hear was the blood rushing in my ears. I had to brace myself against the wall as I made my way to my parents' room, because I was almost shaking too hard to hold myself up. "Mom?" I pushed open her bedroom door. It creaked, the sound almost deafening against the silence that blanketed the room. Our old gray cat, Gumbo, weaseled her way through the crack and slipped out into the hallway, brushing against my leg on her way. I saw a lump in the bed. For a moment I thought it was just pillows, but then I realized it couldn't have been. The bed was made and the pillows were accounted for, leaning against the headboard. "Mom, are you asleep?" It came out as a whisper, even though it wasn't like I had been trying to wake her up. I wanted her awake badly. I think I just somehow already knew. Something was hanging in the air, the heaviness, like the whole world had been blanketed in a thing that was empty and hot and dead. A desert popped into my head, a place that was so far away from everything and completely devoid of anything, devoid of life. When I pulled back the covers, the shock washed over me like an electric zap. Every one of my veins and bones and muscles felt 20 degrees hotter than they should have been. There was blood everywhere. I could barely see any section of the sheets that wasn't soaked in it. It looked like the cherry juice we sometimes made from the tree in our backyard, squashing the berries with our hands and laughing as the sticky syrup trickled down our wrists. Her eyes were open. Her mouth was open too, wide open, like she was about to scream. I gagged, stumbling backwards and almost falling down. My legs felt like they wouldn't work anymore. I was in a daze as I stumbled back to the kitchen. The eggs on the pan seemed like they were mocking me now. I knew my parents had told me what to do in an emergency, but all of that was gone from me now. This didn't feel like an emergency. It felt like a horrible nightmare. I pinched myself on the arm just in case. The neighbors. That was it. I was supposed to call my neighbors. The number was on a sticky note next to the phone. My fingers shook as I dialed the number. They picked up after 3 rings that felt like they took 1 year each. I heard a sort of cackling sound, like someone was moving the phone around. "Hello?" "Hi." I cleared my throat, trying to get rid of the lump firmly lodged in the back of my tongue. "This is Jackson from next door." I heard some sort of giggle, a choked one, like they were trying to hold it back, and then some hushed whispering. "Hi, Jackson," the voice said. I assumed it was the mother, Mrs. Winston. "Is everything all right? Can I help you with something?" Something happened. My mom." "Oh, honey," Mrs. Winston said, her tone gentle, but something about it felt deeply off. My stomach twisted. "Why don't you head over here, We'll figure out what's going on together." "Okay." I remember hanging up before she said anything else. Something about her voice was unnerving me. Still, I didn't know where else to go. I slipped out the back door so I wouldn't have to walk past the mailman, Gumbo, watching me go. I knocked on the neighbor's door. No answer. I knocked again. Still nothing. I stepped into the flower beds, peeling in through the windows. Someone was lying on the couch, their head tilted back like they were staring at the ceiling. For a moment, that was what I thought was happening. until I saw that their chest was opened up like a patient on a surgery table. All guts and organs and blood. So much blood. It was Mr. Winston, in his sweater vest and brown dad shorts. Dead like the mailman, dead like my mom. Something came over me, and I burst through their front door. It was unlocked, which I hadn't really expected, so I went tumbling into the room, landing on my stomach, my face slamming into the floor, face to face with Mrs. Winston, who lay dead in front of the phone. Her eyes were open too. There was a fly on one of them, crawling across the white, pulsing every few seconds to rub its hands together. I had started to cry. It was finally hitting me that this was real, not some dream, and I desperately wanted my mom. I scrambled to my feet, nearly throwing up when I realized my face was covered in her blood. I swiped at it with my hands, trying to wipe it away as quickly as possible. Then, instinctively, I licked my lips. Horrified, I braced myself for the coppery taste of the blood on my tongue. But it never came. It was sweet. I hesitated, trembling incessantly, before cautiously raising one of my red fingers to my lips. Sweet. Memories flooded my mind. Memories of baking with my grandmother, the sweet syrup we would sometimes pour into the mixing bowls. It was corn syrup. I ran to my father's work, which was on the other side of town. By the time I got there, I was close to passing out and drenched in sweat, but it had made it a little easier to get here with the road completely devoid of cars. There were some, parked on the side of the road or every now and then in the middle of it, but none of them had people in them. Some of them had blood, thick and red and gooey blood. The nice receptionist that was always at the front desk, and always gave me candy when my dad brought me in, had her head against the computer. Her hair was matted with red liquid, as if someone had ripped out entire chunks of her scalp. Before I could think too hard about it, I wiped my finger across the side of her head and licked it. It was sweet, too. It felt like my brain was going to break, like I was standing on the edge of something completely incomprehensible. I shook the woman. She flopped like a rag doll. I sobbed, shoving her, and she slumped to the ground, her head knocking against the tiles. "Wake up," I screamed at her. "I know you're not dead." She didn't move an inch, just stared, unblinking, her mouth hanging half open. I ran into the room my dad usually worked in, scanning it for his workspace. I couldn't remember where it was, just that it was around halfway back, and close to the wall. In every cubicle someone was dead. Sometimes they look halfway peaceful, as if they'd been caught by surprise, but most of them were eviscerated in one way or another, entrails hanging out, bones showing, blood sprayed against the walls, even some with faces ripped clean off. It was like something unseeable had swept through the town on a rampage. But all of their blood was made of corn syrup. In a brief moment, I even touched one of the organs, something that looked like a strange, deflated balloon, and it jiggled, but more like plastic than a human body. At one point I swore I heard a giggle behind me. I whipped around, but no one was there. I found my dad at the water cooler, sitting against the wall, cone, paper cup, still gripped loosely in his hand. He stared straight ahead, blood leaking from his eyes, nose, and mouth, like he'd exploded from the inside. "Dad?" I whispered, grabbing his shoulder. "This isn't funny. Please stop." There was a strange look on his face that I could just barely make out through the red, almost like a smile someone would only make if they were trying very hard not to. I walked back home down the middle of the road, balancing on the yellow lines to have something to focus on, because I was fairly certain if I stopped walking, I wouldn't start again. When I got there, I climbed into bed and I closed my eyes. I didn't know what else to do. Eventually, after what must have been hours and hours of lying there, I drifted off into a restless sleep. I woke up to someone shaking my shoulder. I screamed, scrambling away from them, immediately wide awake and terrified. "Whoa!" My mom backed away smiling. "Sorry, buddy. I didn't mean to scare you." I was breathing hard. I looked her over, clutching my chest. She was completely fine. She looked it, at least. She stood there in a white blouse and blue jeans, her hair tied up like always, her eyes bright and happy. What day is it?" Her smile faded, and she frowned a little. It was then that I noticed the smell of bacon wafting in from the kitchen. "It's Sunday, bud, remember?" 2 days after my birthday, so yesterday had been real. What happened yesterday? She placed the back of her hand on my forehead, tutting softly. "Did one of those neighborhood kids you play with get you sick, honey? Do you feel okay?" I dropped it because I didn't know what to say. I convinced myself maybe I really was sick. Maybe it had been some kind of feverish hallucination. And I was so relieved to see her. I didn't want to think about any of it anymore. I went to eat breakfast, sitting at the table between my dad and my sister, and everything was normal. But when I left the house later that day, I saw it. On the walkway leading up to our house, there was something pink on the pavement, a faint pink stain, like something sweet and red and sticky had been recently scrubbed away. Like I said, it's been 30 years. I've been feeling like I had almost recovered from that incident. I had asked everyone I knew countless times about that day, but none of them seemed to have any idea what I was talking about. But still, I had almost let it go, and it had never happened again. Not until today. Today I walked into my therapist's office. It seemed strangely quiet. There was usually music playing, something soothing and soft, and there were people in the waiting room and at the front desk typing on a keyboard. But today, nothing. No one. Silence. I let myself into Dr. Sheldon's office, perplexed, which is when I found her dead on the carpet, her blood sprayed across all the walls, even dripping from the ceiling. It was crazy, I know that, but I immediately tasted it. Sweet. I rolled her over and her eyes were open, a strange smile on her face. This time I did something I didn't think to do as a kid. I checked her pulse. She's alive. I don't know what to do. I can't believe they're doing this to me again. Do they think this is funny? When I was a kid, from around the ages of 2 to 10, I always watched the same show after school, Dandy's Wondrous Adventures. It was a show that I had kept tabs on ever since I was a baby. It had been with me since the beginning, and for good reason. Even as an adult, I can point out the many lessons the show taught me as a boy. How to tie my shoes, how to properly eat, how to keep up conversations, etc. It was a much-needed show for a kid of my upbringing. My dad had died before I was born in a botched robbery, and my mother worked as a surgeon, meaning she was gone most of the day, coming back home around 9 to 10 at night. So, most of my youthful lessons were taught by the show. Every episode entered the same. Dandy, an anthropomorphic dandelion, and his sisters, Rosie, Daisy, and Blue Bonnie, would run up a hill, click their heels, which were leaves, face the viewer, and ask how their day had gone. They'd wait for about 5 seconds and would respond. If the episode was oriented around something happy, they'd all smile and say, "That's terrific." If it was oriented around something not happy, they'd all share a small look of unanimous dissatisfaction and say, "Well, ain't that a shame?" Every time I came home from school, I'd divulge into the characters on how my day went. I always would be disappointed when my response didn't match theirs, and it never did. I tallied the times I matched their responses with mine, and I was down by 47 marks to my 0. Regardless, it was nice to see whatever my favorite cast of characters had in store for me that day. However, this static stream of constant enjoyment changed one afternoon. It was a rainy April day, and I had just gotten home after the torrent of watery sheets had ended its assault on me. I had no homework for the day, and after finishing all my chores, I galloped upstairs to turn on my TV and pay a visit to my friends. Once again, the episode entered the same way, with Dandy and his sisters dancing up the hill, stopping and asking me how my day had gone. My day had gone pretty poorly. At school, I had a teacher named Miss Carroll. I was the quiet, nerdy type in elementary school, so Miss Carroll saw me as easy pickings. She'd berate me day in and day out about how weird I was, how I had no friends, and how I was a loser. Anytime I tried to report her, no one believed me. Usually I didn't respond, but today hurt a lot worse. One of my classmates told her about my dad and used the newfound information as ammunition against me. She never hit me, but it felt like she did. It hurt. I confided with Dandy on the issue, how much I hated her, how rude she was, and my anger towards her for being such a jerk. In my endless tirade about how much I deplored her, it had slipped my mind that Dandy hadn't said anything. It had gone well over 5 seconds, but they didn't speak. No interruptions, no exclamations, nothing. Silence. Even the music had ceased. Once my rant had subsided, I turned to look at the TV. Their expressions were not the usual ones they wore. They didn't look happy or mildly sad. No, they looked mad. All of them wore this expression of intense grimace, like someone had just told them off, or stole something and gotten caught doing it. Dandy looked the angriest. "How rude," he said, his speech sounding as if his teeth were clenched. Blue Bonnie stepped up to the screen, her arms crossed, staring dead at me like a hawk. "People like that are just so bad, right?" she proclaimed. "You said it," they all announced. Slowly their expressions of disdain faded. Dandy spoke up again. "Well, it's a good thing we're talking about bullies today, huh?" They all shook their heads in approval. The episode transitioned to a school area, where they all gathered in what I would guess was the cafeteria. It was rosily colored, with hints of bright pink, yellow, green, and red across all of the furniture in the room, ranging from tables to art, common colors for a kids' show. Rosie pointed at another flower. He wasn't a part of the usual cast, but they all regarded him with some level of knowledge. "That's Miss Wilkins. She's the worst," Rosie exclaimed. "She's the school bully here, and worst of all, she's a teacher. Everyone is scared of her," Daisy said. Dandy took his place in the center of the screen. "To get a bully off of you, sometimes you have to teach them a good lesson. Give them a reason to think twice before messing with you. Right, guys?" They all unanimously uttered and before turning all at once to the screen. Blue Bonnie looked at everyone else. "But won't you get in trouble for something like that?" she said. They all looked at her before turning back to face me. "To get a bully off of you? It's worth it." Their expression then changed to one of a kinder look, smiling warmly at me before returning to the hill. They all joined in unison to wish me good luck for tomorrow, as they always did, before the credits rolled. I was stunned. It was like the universe had aligned at that exact moment to help me with my problem, but it was the wrong solution. As much as I despised her, it wasn't worth it to get in a whole load of trouble for fighting a teacher. What good would it do to help my problem anyway? I'd have to do some serious damage to her for the bullying to cease. A simple hit to the nose would just make my problems worse. It honestly felt like the advice they'd had given me was, for the first time, bad. By that moment, the constant pitter-patter of rain had lulled me into a drowsy mess, so I decided to take a quick nap and recuperate. My head touched the soft, comforting surface of my pillow, and I slipped away into my dreams. Around 7:30, I awoke to one hell of a wake-up call. Wake up! It was violent, aggressive, booming, as though a prison warden was waking up an inmate. There was no friendliness in the command, no leeway, just rage. I popped out of my bed like a meerkat that had sensed an impending threat, but when I did, I saw that the TV had been turned on, and there he was, Dandy. However, strangely enough, his sisters weren't there. The background was dark, nearly pitch black, with only the moon present in the frame. The grass that was usually bright had turned sickly, adorning a new, yellowish color. "So you won't listen," Dandy said. His eyes furrowed into a deep, burning glare. "We are trying to help you with a problem, like we have for years." I didn't know what to say. It felt as if my body was stuck. Was this sleep paralysis? Was it a dream? "Do you not like us anymore?" Before I could find the courage to stammer anything out, his sisters came into the shot. "Because we don't like you. We never liked you." Their words burned, while my throat felt like it was held in place with barbed wire. Dandy moved forward. "Maybe she's right. Maybe you are a loser." They all began to snicker, until it eventually devolved into laughter. They shot out snide remarks, comments about my hair, face, and anything they could latch onto. They even bit into my dad's death. "He probably did it on purpose. Who would want to have a son like you?" Rosie said. "I bet he faked his death to get away from you," Blue Bonnie said. "Or maybe he did it himself out of disappointment." Before Dandy could finish what he was going to say, I shut the TV off. I was a hot mess of tears, snot, and fear. Balled up on my bed, I couldn't bring myself to move until morning came. It was a Saturday, and Mom was at work still. She was at the hospital's best surgeon, meaning there were quite a few weekends where she'd be gone for half the day. I wanted to get up out of bed to get breakfast, but I was still in shock after the incident the night prior. Was it a dream? Was it just my imagination? No, it couldn't have been. I felt everything. All those words, insults, and crude remarks. I felt them all. After much thought, I finally crawled out of bed and went downstairs. The sky had cleared since yesterday, with a bright, beautiful hue of blue and yellow beaming down for all to enjoy. After eating a healthy bowl of cereal, I returned to my room and decided to see if I could get some gaming in. I usually game during the weekends anyway, as my mom didn't let me play during school days. After a couple hours on the console, a familiar, yet mellow voice snapped my attention back to the TV. "Hey, friend." It was Dandy again. In the past, that voice would be a source of comfort. Now, it frightened me. I stood still, my head not daring to look back at the character who had become just as oppressive as my teacher. "Look at me, please." Dandy's voice wasn't violent this time. It had the same warm aura it had before the previous night. He sounded apologetic. I slowly looked over my shoulder. They were all there this time. Dandy, Bonnie Blue, Daisy, and Rosie. But they weren't standing. They were sitting on the hill. The background had returned to its entrancing bright blue color, and the grass looked healthy again. Everything had returned to normal, apart from the characters. Their faces now expressed a look of regret, a deep regret. "We're sorry, friend. We didn't mean to lash out like that," Bonnie Blue said, her eyes sporting a much brighter, kinder look. "It isn't you. It's us," Daisy said, her leafy hands clasped together in her lap. "We know you still like us. Really, we do," Rosie exclaimed. Dandy then took his turn to look at me, his character near the leftmost part of the frame. "We had an issue like you once. Miss Wilkins would treat us badly. She hated every kid she saw in that school. But for us, she hated us the most." I moved from my chair to stand right in front of the TV. My ears, eyes, and mind completely intertwined with the screen in front of me. It was unbelievable. "She said that we were troubled children who deserved to be alone," Daisy said. We had no parents of our own, so we relied on her, Dandy said. One day, Miss Wilkins said that she had enough with our behavior. She dragged us into the drawing room, locked us in, and left us there, Bonnie Blue proclaimed. Dandy looked up from his lap, his eyes a constant of sadness and misery. We never left, he said. We don't want the same for you, Rosie announced. You made us happy, so we want you to be happy. We just got scared that you might move on the same path, Dandy said. I smiled at the TV, beaming happiness through their kind words. It was still a show at the end of the day, so I thought that this was their way of teaching courtesy and openness. But we think it's time for us to say goodbye. My smile quickly dissipated into a slightly open mouth, my eyes wide with surprise. You're getting old now, big and strong, just like your dad, Daisy exclaimed, her smile replacing mine. We've taught you all we can, friend, Rosie said. I grasped the TV, words slowly bubbling into my throat of pleas for them to stay. We always cared about you, even when you were with us back there, Bonnie Blue said. They all stood up and took each other's hands, and smiled the widest smiles I'd ever seen them showcase. My head was pressed up against the glass panel separating me from them, my eyes a waterfall of emotion and distress. I begged for them to not leave. Thank you for tuning in with us, friend, they all said. Slowly but surely the screen faded to black, and in big white letters the words, "The End," covered the TV. Then it cut to static. All that remained was me, weeping and shattered. Years later, on my 16th birthday, after a big party with my closest friends, of whom I had many at that point, my mom called me into the living room. I thought that maybe there was another present waiting for me, so I eagerly waltzed into the room with an immense pep in my step. But my mom did not share my enthusiasm. She looked sullen and tense. Sit down, please, she said, her voice controlled and centered, yet anxious. I complied, my own appearance visibly moving downwards into a look of paralleled seriousness. I know that it's your big day, but we need to talk about something I've been meaning to tell you for a while. What proceeded to be said to me shook the core of my world forever. My mom told me that, while it was true that my dad had died in a botched robbery, he wasn't truly my real dad, and that she wasn't my real mom. I had lost my original family a year after I was born in a car accident on the freeway, after a truck had lost control and slammed into the side of their car. They died on impact. I was lucky, as I had been at daycare, which they were coming to pick me up from. I had no extended family, so I was put in the foster care program and adopted by a woman named Miss Wilkins, who was a boarding school teacher in her past. According to Mom, she was an extremely cruel woman who would regularly beat her adopted children for the littlest of reasons, ranging from breathing too loud to having a cough. One day, however, she went too far when 4 of her children, after supposedly protecting me from a vicious beating, were locked in a room for a week. They didn't come back out. The other kids, including myself, were not let out of the house after that to avoid any of us telling another person what she had done to them. Eventually the neighbors noticed how we were never leaving, and called the police. Miss Wilkins was sentenced to life in prison. I was stunned, unable to move, as though I was locked in place by my feet. Take as much time as you need to process this. I'm right here, my mother said. As my mind began to make sense of it all, I started having sparks fire off in my brain. Miss Wilkins. I could have swore I knew that name from somewhere. Wilkins, Wilkins, Wilkins. And then it hit me like a boulder rolling down a hill. Miss Wilkins. The teacher from the show. I rushed out of the living room, up to my bedroom, and threw my computer open with almost lightning-fast speed. I looked up the case, typing everything I could in, praying I could find something. 4 of the 5 searches popped up generic results for other heinous foster parents. But then on my 5th search, I found it. Boarding school teacher charged with 4 counts of first-degree murder after locking children in room. I scrolled through the article, and everything aligned with what my mom said. There was no mention of my name anywhere, but the presence of them defending another kid was in the article. Along with it, photos of the drawings they made while locked inside were posted into the article itself. All pictures of them as flowers. At the bottom it listed the names of the deceased children. My heart sank, and my jaw followed its motion. Rosalina Matthews, Bonnabelle Lee, Daisy McCullen, Daniel Morello. I had no words. I had no movement. It felt as though the world itself had spun upside down, and I was bearing the brunt of it. Snapping out of my haze, I looked up the cartoon. I searched for what felt like hours. Nothing. Not a single mention of any show titled Dandy's Wondrous Adventures. It made no sense. What the hell was I watching then? Did I imagine it? Was I going through some sort of trauma-induced hallucination? It shattered what little grip on reality I had left at that moment. Their names, the show, the antagonist of that one rainy day. It all neatly funneled into this one case that I had apparently been involved with when I was just a toddler. And yet, it only added more complexities and more emotions. Fear, confusion, sadness, empathy, and finally, courage. I'm 28 now, and I have been an animator for over 8 years. Recently I pitched the idea for Dandy's Wondrous Adventures to the board, and just yesterday, it was approved. I did it for them. Whether or not the show I watched was real, this one will be, and I wanted to help people just like me. Just like them. I've never told anyone this story, and I never planned to. Until today. As of writing this, I received an envelope at my door from an anonymous letter. All it says on the front of the envelope is, "From your friends." Inside the envelope was a crumpled old, worn piece of paper. It looked as though it had been set out in the sun for years. On one side of the paper was a drawing, as though it was made by a kid. Or rather, a group of kids, as the styles are all different. It looked fresh, completely out of place with the worn-down canvas that had been used. On the drawing is them, the characters. They all adorn beautiful white wings and halos above their heads, while a small, pretty purple butterfly guides them towards the sun. All of them are hand in hand, just like the last time I saw them. On the back, in 4 corners of the paper, in yellow, indigo, red, and white, was the same phrase, again and again, yet the meaning and significance of the phrase remained constant. Thank you. In the middle, a heart presented itself, with it colored in quadrants, the same colors used for the messages. Thank you too, friends. What I am about to tell you will sound crazy, but I need your help, so please, read. 3 days ago, my parents and my older brother went to my cousin's wedding. Me and my brother are not very fond of parties or my extended family, but since he's the elder son, my parents always drag him along to family reunions. To endure these ordeals, he always takes his earbuds with him. Since we moved to the current home, about 10 years ago, things always went missing out of the blue. A key, a toy car, the TV controller, and there was no point in looking for the missing objects. We could search all over the house and never find them. Nowadays, when something goes missing, my father will say, "Forget it, and it will find its way back to you." And every time, without failure, he was correct. Because after a couple days or weeks, sometimes entire months, the missing item would be found in an incredibly obvious location. Me and my family figured this was a normal occurrence. easily explained by healthy faults in our memories and so on. So we got used to it and lived normal lives. On that fateful day, my brother could not find his earbuds, so I said the words that our father had imprinted in our brains. "Forget it, and it will find its way back to you." He nodded in agreement and said, "Hopefully it will show up soon." My father and my mother were already waiting for him in the car. I said my farewells from the front door and they left. I wish they didn't. I had spent that entire day reading Blood Meridian. In fact, I carried the book with me to the front porch, and as I was going back, I left the book on the dining table, to the right of the hallway that leads to my room. I sat down on my office chair and booted up my PC. I spent the rest of the evening playing video games. It was around 9 p.m. when I heard it. Thump. Coming from the end of the hallway, the sound of a hardcover book hitting the wooden floor. I figured it was my book. I must have left it in some awkward position on the table. I got up and opened the door of my bedroom. Then I saw it. A person, a creature, something about half my size. Just finishing a small jump from the right of the hallway to the left, the book laid in the right. At the foot of the dining table, I was immediately paralyzed. I just stood there, like a deer in front of headlights. A pitch-black hand with elongated, clawed fingers reached from the edge of the wall all the way to the other side of the hallway, grabbed the book, and quickly went into hiding. Slowly, the dark figure put its head out of the edge, and for a split second our eyes met. My heart was beating out of control. I was on the verge of puking as I hastily closed and locked my bedroom door. I heard footsteps approaching me. I broke down crying in a corner. It's been 3 days. No one is picking up on my calls. No one is answering my messages. My family has not returned. I hear inhuman sounds just outside my room. I see shadows moving, creeping in and out of what I hope is a familiar hallway. I'm too scared to look out the window. I'm thirsty and hungry. I'm not sure that this text will reach anyone, but I'm desperate. Please, find me. It started when I first heard the music. I'm not going to tell you how I came into possession of this particular music, nor am I going to tell you what it sounded like, or anything particular about it, because even knowing these things can have an effect. All you need to understand is that this particular music, when I heard it, forced me to walk in a straight line. I was at home at the time, in my London flat. I had started to listen to the song with my wireless headphones. As soon as the music started, I felt the itch to start moving. By then, it was already too late, but I kept listening, not yet aware of the mistake I was making. And then, just as the first track neared its end, I rose from the sofa, turned and faced the wall, and started walking. Have you ever seen an NPC in a video game walk into a wall? Or a speedrunner trying to clip through a wall to get to areas of the game map they're not supposed to? I had walked over to the wall and onto the armchair which kept me from the wall. After standing on the armchair, I just kept walking into the wall, knocking off a picture frame. The thing was, the music was fresh to my ears and still playing, so its effect was at its strongest. I was completely lucid of what I was doing, but that part of my brain that would signal for me to stop simply didn't exist anymore. The closest thing I could compare the feeling to is being in the throes of an addiction, whether it be drinking or gambling or whatever. You know what you're doing isn't good for you, that you have to stop, but there's just something not there. The will, the care factor. Did it hurt headbutting the picture frame of my recent university graduation photo off the wall? You bet. Did I care? Certainly. I wanted to stop with every fiber of my being, but I simply couldn't. I kept going, walking against the wall, feeling the coarse wallpaper rubbing against my brow and rubbing at the skin. I think I lost a few eyebrow hairs in the process. In under a minute, I reached the corner of the living room. There should have been nowhere else to go, but stopping simply wasn't an option. I had hoped, though I couldn't stop, and I was pretty sure I was having some kind of stroke by this point, that reaching the wall would ease the burden to keep moving in a straight line. Thing was, I was already off the line, and it hurt, worse than any migraine, or worse than any flop sweat indigestion. And still the music continued to play in my head. I was on to the second track, but its effect was still the same. Keep moving. Stay the line. I reached for the door handle. Found it locked, so I took a moment to unlatch it. Then the door opened and I stepped out onto the small balcony, and I kept walking. This was where I feared I might walk straight off the balcony. Below there was a car, which I had to rapidly consider as the least worst option to jump down onto. Besides the car, which was a simple four-seater, all that remained was a drop which would likely break my ankles. That was when I discovered some freedom to my situation. I didn't have to simply fling myself over the balcony. There was no stopping, but I had a tiny bit of my brain to work with to decide how I would get back to the true line. Instead of just up and overing myself over the balcony railing, I stopped, climbed over carefully, and then did my best to control my fall onto the car. I landed with a thump, landing squat, and the car's alarm started going off. It was midday, so the odds of people nearby seeing what I had just done was high. Did I want them to see me do it? What if they thought I was trying to do damage to the car on purpose? I moved down to the front of the car and slid on down the front windscreen on my butt. I was wearing slippers when I started playing the music. They looked like large, fluffy monster paws. I was also wearing baggy PJ bottoms, a loose-fitting gray t-shirt with short sleeves, and a navy bathrobe which was currently untied. My mobile phone was tucked into my right bathrobe pocket, and I had the headphones on my head. The only other item of note on my person were my glasses. I'm nearsighted. On the ground, I just kept walking, moving diagonally across the estate. Should I shout for help? I thought. The music was so loud it was making it harder to think, too. I thought about taking the headphones off, but the idea of doing so made me almost keel over and vomit. I passed two cars on the edge of a large estate building, and approached a small garden area with a path which led through the middle part of another complex. I knew the true straight line would take me through the very thick green bushes ahead of me, but I found I could muster enough willpower to walk onto the concrete path. It was like a bargain with whatever it was about the music that was forcing me to keep on the line. I'll return to the line immediately after. Just let me walk around, I thought, and found I could do just that. I walked the path, stomping ahead in my big goofy monster slippers, and kept going. This took me through a garden area, and then into a small car park. It seemed at first the natural progression was to leave the car park through the way the cars would exit on the right, but that, I quickly discovered, was way too far from the true line. So, like when I had walked to the corner of my living room, I had to walk to the corner of the car park too. Throughout all this, I tried to understand why it was I couldn't find the will to take my headphones off, or to stop walking altogether. It didn't help that it felt amazing to stay on the true line. Better than taking off socks after a long day. Better than the first sip of a freshly cracked open can. Better than Friday night at the end of the work week. And that was just the start of my love of true line. At the corner of the car park, there was a little hut-like structure. I walked to the edge of that, climbed over a metal railing, when I walked through a small tunnel to the other side of the estate building. This put me onto the pavement on the other side, and then I walked into the road. The sudden horrible screech of car tires met my ears. I turned and saw a rotund, middle-aged woman in her car. "What are you doing?" she yelled out, though most of what I could hear was still being drowned out by the music. "I can't stop," I yelled back. The answer didn't seem to be good enough for the woman. She got out of her car and started walking towards me. "Stop! Come here!" she yelled. "Stop?" I thought. The idea of stopping revolted me, but a part of me wanted to try. This woman was angry, sure, but what if I could get her to take the headphones off for me? Maybe that would give me back my right mind. But the closer she got to me, the more a nasty dread gripped me on the inside. Panic unlike anything I had ever felt before started to rise up within me. So much so that when the woman tried grabbing for my bathrobe, I let out a scream so loud I would have a sore throat for the rest of the day. I thrashed my arm back and stopped the woman in her tracks, perplexed by my reaction. I started to jog, staying true to the line. The woman didn't give chase, but instead, the last I saw of her, she had her phone held to her ear. Calling the police, I wondered. Or maybe her husband. I couldn't look back for long because I walked all the way down the road, crossed over to the other side of the street, and approached a large tree. Please let me go round it, I pleaded inside my head. But I knew there was some wiggle room. As soon as I realized I could climb over the metal railing, thrash around the bush behind it, and then continue on, the fight in me to resist died out. I did just that, and moved beyond the tree. This took me into the driveway of another estate building at the furthest corner of the whole complex. It seemed like a dead end because there were no gaps left. Right ahead, there was just a house. I wanted to stop but couldn't find the will to do so. The 5th track from the music album. If you feel the need to get up from where you're sitting, that'll be because I just mentioned the music part was part of an album. Sorry. I'll not mention any more about the music if it can be helped. So I continued on, and found myself standing outside the house in front of me. The front door was just off to my right, the window into what might be the living room to my left. I had hardly any time at all to think about what I might do next. Every second I didn't move forward was like being trapped inside a hot car with the windows shut. 100-fold. I tried the door handle to the house. No luck. I knew I didn't have the strength to kick the door down, but what else could I do? I saw in my mind's eye the solution. All I needed to do was drive my head through the window to my left. The glass would break if I hit it hard enough, wouldn't it? Some part of me was excited to try, intrigued even. I couldn't move forward on the true line if I didn't drive my head through the window pane. Please, I pleaded inside my head. Please, no. There was an awful cramp in my neck as I forced my gaze to the ground. There was a small stone turtle ornament next to the doormat. I picked it up, and seeing as it was better than using my head, I smashed in the window with the stone turtle ornament. Move in, move in, move in. My body and mind pleaded with me, but I had just enough lucidity and self-control to use what wits I had left to strike away the sharper bottom and side edges of the window pane, and then I chucked the stone turtle ornament inside and climbed through the window. And it was after landing and getting to my feet that I noticed I had stopped moving, and there, on the carpet among the broken glass, were my headphones. The faint, tinny sound of the music on a new track. Again, I'm sorry that you've likely been counting the number of tracks which have been playing. I suggest you don't leave your home for the next few days because you might seek true line whilst driving or walking down the street. Please don't risk it. For a moment I was filled with joy. The headphones were off. I was free. Because without the music playing directly into my eardrums, how could it have control over me? To make sure I was free, I stomped on the headphones, my right foot aching from the force it took to render the headphones completely obsolete. I was stiflingly hot in my bathrobe, sweating and breathing, huffing breaths. But in the silence of the house I had just broken into, I heard it. The music, playing inside my head. I'm sorry to tell you this. I really, really am. But the music is seriously catchy. I turned around to face Trueline and kept walking. It's been a while since it all started. I'm posting this using my phone whilst on the move. I'll try and explain more, but many obstacles lay ahead. It was a warm summer night in the back county of South Carolina. I recently moved from the north, so I wasn't familiar with how to get around yet. I had just had dinner with my grandparents and cousins, and was in the middle of my 45-minute drive back to my apartment. I always keep my phone on a holder while driving, and only touch it when I'm skipping through music. It started with my GPS malfunctioning, ending my map and destination, and then suddenly going back to normal. I didn't think anything of it due to some spots having crappy cell service. I continued to drive down the road, bouncing my head to 2000s throwbacks and occasionally sipping my Red Bull. I have a habit of unconsciously checking the time when I go to check how fast I'm driving. That's when I noticed my clock was an hour behind. I immediately tapped my phone, which showed the time. 2 hours behind. I instantly grew confused. I thought I had just left after 6 p.m., and it was now nearly 8 p.m. Suddenly my GPS froze, and I desperately tried to fix the jam, all while driving down a dark road. The only light came from my headlights. Then, my GPS turned back on. The GPS popped back on and began rerouting me. I thought nothing of it, since I had no idea where I was. I continued to drive, following the directions until I eventually reached a dark dirt road surrounded by trees. My stomach started to churn, and I grew extremely uneasy and fear struck my body. I frantically looked around for some way to make a U-turn, when my car slowed to a stop in the middle of the dirt road. Then, my car completely turned off, keys still in the ignition, Bluetooth disconnected, phone silent. The feeling in my stomach grew stronger. Every bone in my body was telling me, "Get out, now." I frantically looked around trying to pinpoint where I could go, what I could do, how I could defend myself if needed. My car slowly started to fill with a foul, vomit-inducing stench, like flesh that was rotting from the inside out. I gagged and nearly threw up. The nerves, the stench, and the fear all building up as bile in my throat. I wanted to leave. Then I heard it, moaning, loud, guttural moaning, that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. I quickly looked around, and at this point, I was preparing for the worst. The moaning continued until it sounded like it was right beside my car. As soon as I turned my head, I was staring at a dark, terrifying silhouette. The moonlight made it difficult to see at first until I noticed the shape. A deer. I had seen many deer in my life, but none of them had this shape. From what I could see, its neck was longer, thicker, its back was slightly sunken in. I saw its antlers, which extended straight up. What happened next made me sick. As if the deer wasn't terrifying enough, it slowly stood up. All of its animal-like features were gone, aside from the head. I whimpered at this point. I could feel my seat dampening and my jeans soaking. I had urinated myself. The entity stood up and walked past the front of my car. Like any other human before it, faded into the darkness of the forest. As soon as I could no longer see it, my car turned back on and the music continued, bumping Britney Spears through my bass. The feeling of dread and sickness began to pass, and running on pure adrenaline, I ripped my gear into reverse, drove off the road, hitting some bushes and sped back towards the entrance. I was panting. My hands were shaking and my pants were soaked, but I didn't care. The second I pulled out onto the main road, my GPS went back to its original route and resumed the drive. 37 minutes. I was 37 minutes away from home. I continued driving and I quickly dialed my boyfriend's number, not caring about my no hands rule. My boyfriend answered. "Hey, you on your way home?" I immediately began pouring out everything that happened. The car shutting off, the figure, the smell, everything. My boyfriend ended up staying on the call with me until I got home, and when I returned to our apartment, he ended up checking my engine, my oil, my tires, everything, trying to find an explanation. I knew he was worried beyond belief, and the fact that I peed myself only heightened his concern. My car was dinged up with some minor scratches, but everything seemed alright. and functioning. Later that night, after I had showered, changed into my favorite pajama set, and watched our favorite Twitch streamer, I pulled out my phone and began the GPS to my Nana and Papa's house. I probably spent an hour trying to find the dirt road I was on. The road where everything happened, but there was nothing. I even went into Street View and tapped along the entire route. No dirt road, no location that even remotely resembled the road I had driven down. I don't know why I'm writing this. I'm not a forum guy, but I'm alone out here and I have to tell someone, anyone, just to get it out of my own head. So if I do go crazy, at least there's a record of it. I torched my life about a month ago. Job, apartment, relationship, the whole thing. I'm an architect. Or I was. Had a full-blown burnout. The kind that leaves you feeling hollowed out, you know? I just needed quiet. Needed to start over. I found this listing online. A house going for practically nothing. The catch was its location. The middle of nowhere, in a derelict 60s housing development that went bust. The town's name is Ethelberg. Sounds perfect. A place where the world couldn't find me. When I got here, it was even deader than I'd imagined. A ghost town of asphalt and weeds. Perfectly laid out streets that led nowhere. Rusted streetlights standing like skeletal sentinels. All the houses were identical. These sad little copy-pasted boxes. All of them empty and rotting. Except mine. Mine was clean. Too clean. Like someone had been here a week ago and scrubbed the place down. The first few days were bliss. The silence. I'd forgotten what real silence was. Not city quiet, which is just a low hum. This was a deep, heavy quiet that felt like it was pressing on my eardrums. I started unpacking slowly, starting to feel human again. That's when the little things started. The first thing, it was a picture frame, an old photo of my parents. I'd put it onto the mantelpiece over the brick fireplace. One evening, I'm walking to the kitchen to get a drink. I stop, I pick up the frame and I move it. Maybe 4 inches to the left. The thing is, I don't remember deciding to do it. My hand just did it. Like an autopilot thing, you know? Like when you're driving and you suddenly realize you don't remember the last 5 miles. But after I did it, after the frame was in its new spot, I felt this wave of calm, relief. Like an itch I didn't know I had was finally scratched. I figured, okay, whatever. Stress, nerves, it's a new place. I'm just settling in. A few nights later I woke up, not because of a noise, I just woke up. Eyes wide open in the pitch black. I wasn't in my bed, I was standing in the kitchen. The linoleum was ice cold under my feet. It took me a second to figure out where I was. I hadn't turned on the light. The only light was the pale moonlight filtering through the window over the sink. And I saw what I'd done. Every can of food I owned, I'd taken every single one out of the pantry. Tuna, corn, beans, soup, all of it. And I'd stacked them, not just in a pile. I'd built a perfect, symmetrical pyramid on the countertop. It was flawless. I have no memory of doing this. None. The last thing I remember is reading in bed and turning off the light. And the scariest part, the part that's really messing with my head, is that my first reaction wasn't fear. It was satisfaction. I looked at that pyramid of cans in the dark and some quiet, calm part of my brain just went, there, that's better. The panic didn't hit until I was back in bed shivering. Am I sleepwalking? I've never sleepwalked in my life. But maybe stress can trigger it. A new environment. I kept trying to find a logical reason. I had to, because the alternative was just not possible. But it kept happening. It's still happening. I'm not just sleepwalking anymore. I find myself doing things during the day. I'll be in the middle of something, and I'll just zone out. I'll come to and I'll find I've spent the last hour organizing the books on my shelves. Not by author, not by title, by the exact shade of their color, from lightest to darkest. I found myself on my hands and knees in the bathroom, scrubbing the grout between the tiles with a toothbrush until it was pristine white. I don't remember starting. I just wake up in the middle of it, my back aching, with that same weird, creepy feeling of a job well done. I'm becoming obsessive. That's the only rational explanation. The isolation is getting to me, triggering some latent OCD I never knew I had. My whole day is consumed by it now. Everything has to be perfect, symmetrical. If a coaster is off-center on the coffee table, it's not just annoying, it feels wrong. Physically wrong. I get this knot in my stomach, this rising anxiety that doesn't go away until I fix it. The problem is, it's working. The burnout, the anxiety, the reason I came here in the first place, it's gone. It's been replaced by this obsession with order. It's like my brain has traded one illness for another, and the new one is so much quieter, so much calmer. I tried to fight it. I swear I did. 3 days ago, I decided, screw this. I'm not a slave to this. I deliberately messed up the living room. I left a coffee cup on the floor. I tossed a book onto the sofa instead of putting it back on the shelf. I tried to just live in it, to be a normal, messy human being. I thought I was going to die. It started with a headache, a dull throb behind my eyes. Then a noise started, a low, deep hum, so low it was more of a feeling than a sound. It was like the house was vibrating. It made my teeth ache. I lay on my bed for hours, curled up in a ball, sweating, the pressure in my head building and building. It felt like my skull was going to crack open. I couldn't take it. Around dawn, I gave up. I got up, my head pounding, and I cleaned the living room. I put the cup in the sink. I put the book back on the shelf, in its correct color-coded spots. I straightened the rug. The second I finished, the instant the room was back in perfect order, it stopped. The headache vanished. The humming cut out. Just silence. And that wave of calm washed over me again. It's not just in my head. It can't be. OCD doesn't give you a physical vibrating hum in your house. It doesn't stop the second you align your books. This is something else. This house, this place, it's not just a building. It's a system, and it has rules. And I'm learning that breaking them has consequences. And then tonight happened. The thing that made me write this. I was alone in the bathroom, washing my face. I looked up at my reflection in the mirror, and I saw my hand. My right hand. It started to lift. I didn't tell it to. I tried to stop it. I swear to God I focused all my will on telling my arm to stay down. But it was like it wasn't mine anymore. It was like watching someone else's arm attached to my shoulder. It moved slowly, deliberately. I watched, frozen in horror, as my own index finger touched my forehead, and it started to draw. An invisible pattern on my own skin. A spiral with straight lines coming from it, like a stylized sun. I could feel the light pressure of my own nail. I was staring at my own eyes in the mirror, wide with terror, and I couldn't do a single thing to stop it. I was a prisoner in my own body. Probably lasted 10 seconds. Felt like an hour. Then it stopped. My arm dropped to my side. I had control again. I shakily raised my other hand to my forehead. There was nothing there. No mark, no scratch. But I know what happened. I saw it. I felt it. It's not just about the things in the house anymore. It's not about arranging books or cans. It's starting arranging me. I should leave. I know that. A sane person would be packing a bag right now and driving until the sun came up. But I can't. The thought of leaving this house, of leaving anything out of place, it fills me with a kind of dread that's worse than the fear. The thought of the headache, of the humming. And there's something else. The real reason I'm still here. Since this started, since I've been following these rituals, I've been productive. I'm an architect. I design things. I hadn't been able to draw a straight line for 6 months. My creativity was gone, burned out. The other night, after one of the arranging episodes, I sat down at my drafting table and I started to draw. It just flowed out of me. The lines were perfect. The concepts were clear, brilliant. In a few hours I'd designed a structure more elegant and complex than anything I'd managed in my entire career. It was effortless. I wasn't even thinking. I was just the hand holding the pencil. I looked at the finished drawing and I felt that same familiar feeling, that deep, profound satisfaction, the feeling of perfect order. I think I understand now. The house isn't haunting me. It doesn't want to hurt me. It's fixing me. It's taking all the messy, chaotic human parts of me, the anxiety, the depression, the unpredictable spark of creativity, and it's cleaning them up. It's sanding them down. It's putting them in order. It's emptying me of the chaos and filling me with purpose, with structure. And that's the part that terrifies me more than anything else. A part of me wants to let it. A part of me is so tired of the mess. Despite its fresh paint and polished mosaics, the house felt lived in from the moment I stepped inside. It smelled of plaster dust, sharp and clean, but beneath it clung something older, warmth soaked into the wood, as though the walls remembered meals and laughter. Odd for a place so recently renovated. A fact the realtor had repeated almost to the point of insistence. I told myself I needed that renewal. The move wasn't about square footage or mortgage rates so much as distance. From the old job, the hostile boss, the endless small office wars. The new position promised steadiness. A manager who listened, colleagues who minded their own work. A clean start, and this house was meant to be the reward. The kitchen drew me first, counters stiff beneath my hands, hinges creaking as if relearning motion, the fridge humming in steady breath. Morning light cut through the high window and fractured on the island, spreading across the floor in the shape of a 7-pointed star. I stood there that first morning, coffee cooling in my hand, and thought, it's a lucky house. Everywhere I walked, the house seemed to move with me. The third stair lifted its note like a small bell each time I passed. Drafts curved faithfully toward the living room. Doors leaned shut with the softness of pages closing. Rooms guided me always inward, until I found myself where the house seemed to want me, the living room. There, comforts gathered in full, cushions slumped warm from the sun, a rug that hushed each step, ceiling beams converging overhead like carved beads. The room wasn't quite square, but softened, 7-sided, as if shaped more by intent than design. At twilight the beams looked ornamental, suspended like charms. Even the basement carried that stillness. Its door, freshly painted and oiled, caught the sun as I passed, glowing for a moment before dimming again, as though the house drew its breath inward. I never went down until that power failed one evening. Flashlight in hand, I turned the knob. It yielded easily. The air was cool, mineral, faintly sweet, like my grandparents' wine cellar. Moonlight spilled through the narrow window and fell in neat, careful lines. The floor was too smooth for a basement, the concrete sanded down as though someone had gone to lengths to erase its roughness. The breaker box gleamed against the far wall, its switches aligned like teeth. I thought of messaging the realtor later, to thank her for such careful refurbishment. It was rare to find a place where even the hidden rooms had been treated with such care. I didn't properly meet my neighbors until the third week. I'd seen their houses on my walks, whimsical variations on a core theme, one rising with clean brick lines, another softened by ivy, another brightened with shutters and a garden spilling slightly onto the sidewalk. I thought, now and then, that I glimpsed someone through a window or heard a voice carrying across a lawn, but I could never be sure. But that evening they arrived together, like a delegation, each balancing something in their hands. Bottles of wine with supermarket ribbons, casserole dishes still steaming under foil, a wicker basket lined with a gingham cloth, and heavy with bread. They filled the living room with little effort, arranging themselves on the sofa and chairs as if they'd been here countless times before. Their warmth was immediate, their smiles wide and practiced. In minutes the house was alive with the clink of glasses, the soft scrape of cutlery on bone china, and voices tumbling into laughter. The food was wonderful, shockingly so. I helped myself to second, third, even fourth servings of lasagna, and tried not to sound over-eager as I praised the couple who had brought it. They only exchanged a knowing glance, smiling like proud hosts, though it was my house. At one point the drawer in the kitchen island jammed as I reached for extra cutlery. I tugged uselessly until one of the men chuckled and brushed past. "Let me," he said. A moment later I heard his steps on the basement stairs. He reappeared almost instantly with a screwdriver in hand, triumphant. "Managed to find it quick enough," he laughed, as if the tool had been waiting for him. Later, one of the women excused herself to use the toilet. She stopped halfway down the hall, asking which door it was. "Just the next one on your left," I said. "Ah," she replied, nodding with certainty, as though I had only confirmed what she already knew. Curious, I asked, "Did you know the people who lived here before me?" For a heartbeat, the room seemed to pause. Then one of them nodded, smiling as he set his glass down. "Oh yes," he said. "We knew them all." Another added with a chuckle that was just a little too smooth. "We know this house very well indeed." By the time the plates were scraped clean and the last drops of wine drunk, I was flushed with warmth, not only from the alcohol, but from the strange sense of inclusion, of being woven seamlessly into their circle. At the door they thanked me profusely, as though I'd hosted them, pressing my hand or patting my shoulder before vanishing into the night, with their emptied dishes. I locked the door behind them with a kind of satisfaction I hadn't felt in years. The house glowed with the after-image of company, the faint perfume of bread and wine, the hum of laughter still clinging to the walls. For the first time, I thought, perhaps I could belong here. I doused the lights room by room in a slow, meditative rhythm, the old floorboards creaking beneath my steps, until only my bedroom glowed faintly upstairs. Later, with the window cracked open, I sipped the last half glass of wine and let the cool night air wash over me. The houses across the street were still lit, squares of gold burning against the dark, yet no shadows moved behind those curtains. No silhouettes passed in front of lamps. The facade stared back at me, silent and blank, glowing only to insist they were alive. I told myself the neighbors must simply be tired after the long dinner. The thought soothed me. I lay down, listening as the house settled around me, boards easing, pipes sighing, and just as sleep began to take me, I heard it. Something deeper, muffled, rising from beneath the floorboards, a sound almost too faint to catch, like the house itself had sighed. The next morning, sunlight slipped through the blinds in its usual pale strips. I showered, dressed, made coffee, ordinary rituals, grounding me in the start of another workday. But when I stepped outside, briefcase in hand, I noticed the street was as empty as the night before. The same houses stood in their neat variations, lights still humming in windows, but not a single person stirred. No slamming of car doors, no joggers, no children waiting for the bus. Even the air seemed to hush itself. Was it always this quiet in the mornings? I lingered longer than I should have, scanning for the slightest sign of life, until finally I muttered that it was none of my business and walked on. Work passed on eventfully, but in a good way. A respectful, peaceful work environment, where everyone just sat down, got their work done without fuss, where exchanges in the break room felt like breaths of fresh air, rather than heavy with tireless gossip and backhanded compliments. Yet when I returned home at dusk, I kept noticing how quiet it all was. The houses lit like stage props, but no cast to play their parts. I unlocked my door and stepped inside, feeling a strange relief to be swallowed again by my own silence. It was peaceful here, wasn't it? Quieter than anywhere I had lived before. This was the kind of life, the kind of neighborhood I'd always aspired to live in. But as I moved about the evening, reheating my leftover casserole, thumbing through a new book, readying for bed, the quiet never really settled in. I kept catching myself looking out at my neighbor's window, hoping for some sign, any at all, of movement, but it never came. A peculiar sort of liminality where you felt alone, yet not. Something about the way the pipes kept knocking deep below the basement every half hour or so kept me ever so slightly on edge, too. That and the way the basement door glowed in the setting sun, in hazy hues of crimson melting into amber, like the threatening flare of some watchful, venomous creature, made me wary of it. But of course, the power went out again that very night. Hilarious. I grabbed my torch, reluctant but resigned. I sighed before flicking it on, and navigating my way down to the basement. In daylight, the house felt calm, almost protective, as if its walls had been storing quiet for years and were willing to share it with me. But at night, without the ambient, low light filtering through curtains, the silence seemed to sharpen. The hallways felt longer, the corners heavier, the ceilings higher. Every pane of glass reflected my own movements back at me, as though something else were watching just behind. And then there were the faint pinpricks I sometimes noticed only in the darkest corners. Tiny red motes, too dim to be dust, too steady to be tricks of my eyes. I told myself they were from the appliances, some unseen standby light or sensor. Still, once seen, they followed me, like scattered eyes half buried in shadow. I began to suspect that the peace I'd admired by day was only a mask, and that in the dark the house showed its truer face. The door swung open soundlessly as I opened it. A scent met me, cold and strong, carrying with it a scent that reminded me of neither mildew nor dust, but something much earthier, like disturbed ground. I descended, noticing the way the light of my torch seemed to shiver without command. Pipes and boxes, stacked furniture, the expected clutter of an old basement greeted me. I found the fuse box, flipped the breaker, and heard the house above me click and hum back to life. I was about to turn and leave, but something about the way the dust particles caught in my torch beam, as if tugged by a draft from deeper in the dark, drew my attention. I followed it a few steps past the reach of the singular bulb overhead, until my torchlight met a section of the wall where the stone looked different, rougher, and lower to the floor. Half hidden behind a shelving unit, I thought I had seen it opening. Narrow, almost nothing, just enough to let that strange air breathe through. I stood there longer than I should have, staring, listening. It felt like the house was holding its breath with me. I crouched, bringing my face closer to the gap, and pointing my torch into the crack. The draft slid cool across my face, carrying with it that same raw scent of turned earth. The space beyond was narrow, irregular, not a tunnel so much as a crack in the stone, but deep enough that I couldn't really see where it ended. I leaned in, squinting, waiting for the beam to catch on something solid. For a few seconds there was nothing, only shadow piled on shadow, my own breath shallow in the confined space. I sighed, making a note to myself to find a way to seal it off when I had the time. But just as I began to withdraw my head, I thought I saw it, the faintest glimmer, 2 points suspended in the black, catching the light for a heartbeat before sinking back again. Not bright, nor obvious, but enough to give the unmistakable impression of something looking back. I froze. I looked again. A pair of eyes, yearning, patient, like a child waiting for a piece of candy. Unsure what to do, I wordlessly stood up and headed back up, too afraid to react. I slammed the basement door behind me and stood there in the hall, chest heaving, the silence of the house pressing close around me. Upstairs, the lights glowed steadily again, calm and ordinary, as though nothing had happened at all. Sleep never came. I lay awake in the upstairs bedroom, staring at the ceiling while the clock ticked steadily on the dresser. Every creak of the settling house, every whisper of wind at the shutters set my nerves on edge. When at last the windows began to gray with dawn, it felt less like the start of a new day and more like a reprieve. Thin, temporary. The neighborhood outside was the same as before, lawns trimmed, curtains drawn, driveways empty. The house simply sat still and shone with their quiet lights. I told myself it was nothing. Maybe everyone simply had places to be earlier than I did. Regardless, walking to the car, I couldn't help but feel the weight of 100 eyes, all on scene behind those curtained windows. Work did not go well. I sat at my desk fighting to keep upright, fumbling simple tasks, letting emails pile without answer. By midday, my supervisor frowned and then sighed. "You're no good to us half asleep. Go home. Get some rest." I didn't argue, but I didn't really want to go home either. I tried going to a nearby cafe, 2 blocks over from my office. It was there that my mind finally got some reprieve. The chatter of strangers, the soft hiss of the espresso machine, the familiar clink of porcelain, all of it wrapped me in a comfort I hadn't realized I needed. I ordered another coffee, then another, trying to stretch the afternoon out as long as possible. I watched the rain beat against the window, people passing by with their umbrellas, anything to keep my thoughts away from the crack in my basement. But exhaustion is a patient hunter. By the 3rd refill, my hands shook with fatigue, and my vision blurred at the edges. I realized, miserably, that I couldn't outrun sleep forever. When I finally pushed myself up from the table and stepped back into the damp air, the only place left to go was home. Back in the house, I lay on my sofa, restlessly. The basement kept creeping its way back into my mind. What had I really seen? Surely nothing. Just a trick of the light. Nerves wound tightly by the outage. And yet... I sighed, getting up and walking towards the basement door again. I paced back and forth a few times, before finally committing. Hesitantly, I turned the knob and descended once more. The air was cool, still. The shelves stood steadily, undisturbed. I crouched at the same place, torch in hand, and found the gap utterly ordinary. A thin seam in the stone, no deeper than a foot. Nothing stirred. Nothing stared back. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. Everything was normal again. Perfectly, disappointingly normal. Just as I had hoped. That evening, as I was finally getting comfortable again, there was a knock at the door. The same group as before stood on the porch. The women with their practiced smiles, the men carrying covered dishes. I let them in, though something about their presence felt different this time, as if a thread had pulled taut. They settled in the living room again, chatting lightly. Their voices hushed, careful. The food was good, better than I'd expected, but the atmosphere clung close, like damp air. Between mouthfuls, I found myself blurting, "So, what do you all do? For work, I mean. I've noticed the mornings are always quiet." The question landed heavier than I intended. For a beat too long, no one answered. Then one of the men chuckled, though it sounded forced. "We keep busy," he said. Another nodded quickly, adding, "Odd schedules, you know how it is." They moved the conversation along before I could press further. Soon after, they excused themselves, leaving behind the remains of the meal and a faint unease that lingered long after the door shut. I walked them to the porch, waved as they split off toward their homes, then on impulse, hurried to the window. From behind the curtain I watched one of the couples, a man in his heavy coat, a woman clutching his arm. They walked without a word, their steps almost too even, too measured. At their door they didn't glance around, didn't fumble with keys, just slipped inside as if the house had opened up to them. I waited, watching the windows for some sign of light or movement. None came. Instead, through a narrow pane near the ground, I saw them descend the stairs. A door opened, a dim glow flickered once, and then they were gone, swallowed by their basement. They never came back up. Sleep became a strained effort from that night onwards. I kept getting this urge to sit up and peek out at my neighbors' homes. Even when I did commit to sleep, I would constantly startle awake to some faint creaking and rumbling deep in the bowels of the house. And though I told myself it was the house settling, the sound had a way of crawling into my chest and sitting there. Every morning, I was gray with exhaustion, my usual coffee just barely keeping me awake. Work suffered. Several times I nearly nodded off at my desk. Once during a meeting, my supervisor suggested I take some time off, just a week to clear your head. I agreed, though I knew no week would be enough. At home I found myself glued to the windows. I watched the houses like a man waiting for a signal, desperate for proof of life. The lights came on at dusk, glowed steadily until dawn, but not once did I see a curtain twitch or a door open. No one came out for work, no deliveries were ever made, no children played in the yards. Nothing. It was as if the whole street were a set piece, staged for my benefit, while the real activity lay hidden somewhere. Perhaps underground. At night, the noises grew bolder, low thuds, faint clatters, sometimes even the impression of a voice carried through the vents. Each time I would sit up in bed, heart hammering, staring toward the basement door at the end of the hall. I wanted to go down, to fling it open and see once and for all what waited there, but the thought of facing it froze me in place. Instead, I lay awake until dawn, watching the ceiling, counting every sound, knowing I wouldn't sleep, knowing I couldn't. The days began to blur together. I told myself I was only taking time off to rest, but I hardly left the house. Curtains drawn, lights dimmed. I kept my silent vigil. The neighbors' windows stared back at me like blind eyes, never once blinking. I tried to reason it out. Maybe everyone here worked nights. Maybe it was some kind of community agreement. Quiet mornings, quiet evenings, nobody making a fuss. But even in saying it, I could hear the falseness. I knew what I had seen, or rather, what I hadn't. I knew the sounds beneath my house weren't just figments of my imagination. It was in the stillness of one early afternoon that something inside me finally cracked. I had pulled the curtains tight against the light, and in the dimness I noticed it again, that faint, glowing seven-pointed star from the light of the upper window. I'd always thought it charming. Once. Now, it looked like an eye, sharp-edged and cruel, glaring down into the room, glaring at me. The living room, too, felt different, the way the crooked walls leaned in on me, threateningly, conspiring to press the room shut. The ceiling beams that once caught light like beads on a string pressed down heavily, the joints knotting together in sharp, unnatural angles. Less a pattern, but a snare, a geometry that tried to bind me inside it, closing tighter the longer I stared. And then I saw them again in the dimness. The red specks, tiny pinpricks, barely visible in the darkened corners. One above the archway, another tucked near the ceiling vent. Another staring from the hallway like a burning insect. I held my breath. Suddenly, certain I was not alone, I rose, slow as if my movements were being watched, and turned toward the nearest light. It was no trick of exhaustion this time. Leaning closer, I saw, nestled in the tangle of a small potted plant, the faint glassy bulge of a lens. I knew it then. I was being watched. They were watching me. The thought struck so sudden I was already moving, stumbling out the door and across the street. My heart thudded like it would split my ribs. I half expected a curtain to twitch, a shout to stop me, but nothing stirred. The crooked, shuttered house loomed. I set my hand on the knob. It turned too easily. The lock had clicked, yes, but shallowly, like a toy made only to sound real. The door swung inward at the faintest push. Inside, the air was cool and stale, as though sealed for years. The living room was tidy, too tidy. A half-read magazine curled yellow on the table, cushions plumped, curtains half open. It felt staged, preserved, not lived in. The silence here was heavier than in my own house, not absent of sound, but absence of life. Every object seemed set slightly apart from itself. My breathing rasped too loud as my gaze fixed on the plain wooden door at the end of the hall. The basement. I told myself I'd only look, only open it and see, but my hand was already on the knob, already turning. The hinges moaned as I pulled it back. A damp draft curled up from below. I crouched at the top of the stairs and peered down. The light didn't reach far, just the first few steps. Then shadow. A smell of earth rose up, faintly metallic, and steadying myself against the frame, I began to descend. The steps creaked under my weight, each one louder than the rest. I half expected the neighbors to come rushing in, demanding to know what I was doing in their house. But no one came. The air grew colder the farther down I went, the draft sharper against my skin. The bathroom was ordinary, too ordinary. A washing machine sat in the corner, boxes stacked neatly against the wall, the faint smell of detergent clinging to the stillness. For a moment, I almost laughed at myself. Had I really imagined everything? Of course I hadn't. I narrowed my eyes, searching. For what, I wasn't sure. And then my sight caught the far wall. It was there again, the same uneven gap I had in my own basement, the one that I had never dared to inspect too closely. A rough seam where the stone and concrete didn't quite meet, as though the house had been set atop foundations that belonged to something older, something the builders had merely covered rather than disturbed. I crouched down, pulse jittering against my throat. The gap was wider here, easily large enough to slip a hand through. A breath of cold air pulsed from within, damp and insistent, carrying with it the faintest murmur so faint I couldn't be sure if it was a sound at all, or merely the suggestion of it, shaped by the stone. I should have turned back. Instead, I pressed my palms against the jagged edges, and the wall shifted. Not much, just enough. Plaster sloughed away in sodden flakes, and beyond it lay a blackness so absolute it seemed to drink the light from the basement. I don't know what drove me then, exhaustion, obsession, or some older compulsion seeping out through the crack. Perhaps only the need for finality, the need to force the silence to speak. Whatever it was, I pushed myself forward, scraping through until my shoulders cleared, then my hips, then the soles of my shoes, and I was inside. The air was clammy, mineral heavy, pressing against my lungs. My flashlight shivered over raw stone, catching on lines that didn't look accidental, rather smooth as if worn down by endless repetition. This was a passage. A tunnel sloped downward at once, a crude incline spiraling into earth. My shoes scraped loose gravel that hissed downslope ahead of me. I hesitated, but the silence behind me felt heavier than what waited below. So I descended. The air changed as I went. Cooler, yes, but laden too, as if with centuries of dust ground too fine to ever settle. Each breath tasted metallic, faintly briny, as though seawater had long ago seeped into the rock and lingered still. A sound began to emerge. Not voices, not exactly. More like the collected breath of many people whispering just at the threshold of hearing. Not rising or falling, but merging into a single tide pull of sound. I froze, straining to distinguish words. None came, only the endless susurrus, like waves sucking at shingle, patient and eternal. Every few steps I looked back. The pale rectangle of the basement was shrinking, already no more than a warped glimmer. My stomach clenched. If that wall sealed itself again, if it had ever been a wall at all, then no one would ever know I was down here. Still, I kept walking. I followed the whispering. The passage twisted illogically, curving left, plunging downward, rising again. My sense of distance unraveled. I could not tell whether I had gone 50 feet or 500. The air was cooler still, carrying the musk of confinement, a scent like bodies packed too close together in the dark, though none were there. Then at the precipice of nausea and misdirection, I noticed it, a hairline crack in the tunnel wall, faintly familiar. I leaned closer, pressing my eye against it, and my heart lurched. On the other side of the thin veil of earth was a room I knew too well. The bare concrete floor, the slant of the steps, the jumble of paint cans in the corner. My basement. The whispers swelled as if pleased by my recognition. For a mad instant, I felt like they were urging me onward, coaxing me deeper into the labyrinth that stitched neighbor to neighbor, home to home, until perhaps the whole street was webbed together in a single buried artery. Following the noises, I eventually squeezed through a narrow cleft in the stone, the rough edges rasping my shoulders and peeling cloth from my sleeves, finding myself in a vast chamber. The air hit me like damp wool, heavy, wet, and sour with the layered stench of decay. The ceiling hung so low I had to stoop, its surface bristling with roots and beads of black condensation that flattened and burst with slow, deliberate ticks. Candles jammed into fissures spat and wept down their stubs, their glow smeared and multiplied in the sweat of the stone. Shadows leaned unnaturally long, folding and overlapping until they seemed to bend around some hidden core, as though the walls themselves recoiled from illumination. On the earthen floor lay 6 bodies, each arranged with care along the prongs of a vast figure, gouged into the soil. Death had marked each differently. One collapsed into an articulated cage of bone, still wearing the husk of a funeral suit. Another shivered to a leathern skin that clung tight as drumhide. Another bloated with the greenish swell of half-preserved flesh. A slick of fat glistened at the jaw of one, hardened to yellow wax where it touched the dirt. The mingled odors of sweet corruption, dry mildew, and old earth rolled together into something nauseating but almost reverent, like incense turned sour. The 7th space was gaped empty, its soil churned with fresh scarring, as though impatient hands had redrawn the lines again and again, sharpening the groove to accept what must soon complete it. Then I looked up. The walls were crowded with photographs, whole families smiling stiffly on front porches, children's portraits, candid shots from kitchens and backyards. Beneath them, yellowed leases, school certificates, The utility bills were pinned in meticulous rows. One cluster of images showed a man and woman whose features matched two of the bodies on the ground. Another cluster matched the others. And then, farther along, I saw my own face, my parents, my siblings, my resume, copies of letters I'd written years ago. Camera feeds flickered above it all. My living room, my bedroom, my basement stairs. The pattern was undeniable. These were the former residents of my house. I shuddered to think what that meant for me. Around the chamber's edge the neighbors stood in a ring, their faces half lost in the glow, lips working in a ceaseless chant. The sound was not speech, so much as grinding cadence. Breath drawn ragged, consonants bitten short, syllables collapsing into one another until they became a shingle of sound that scraped their ear raw. I pressed myself against the damp, sticky wall, hardly daring to breathe. Their voices rose and fell in uneven cadence, half prayer, half conversation, like a crowd rehearsing lines from different plays. He suspects. No matter, tonight he belongs to our Lord. Then, cutting through the babble, came a tone I knew at once. Calm, polished, practiced. The realtor, the same voice that had once praised crown molding and promised a house with character. Smooth, unshakable, the voice of someone who never failed to close a deal. His place has been waiting, she said, her words rounded and precise. The walls already know his name. Our Lord already knows his name. They resisted too, murmured a man, almost sheepish. They fought, said another. They wept, sighed a third, almost fond. But all children sleep in the end, as will the seventh, the realtor replied, rising above them. And when the seventh sleeps, the circle will be complete. Our Lord will breathe through his lungs. Our Lord will see through his eyes. A low murmur rippled through the circle, threads of hunger, relief, longing tangled together. He is close. He is ready. He will open the way. Silence fell, sudden and crushing, as though the air itself had been sucked from the chamber. Only the faint hiss of a candle remained. My hand slipped against a loose stone. It clattered to the floor, small, ordinary, but in that silence I exploded like a gunshot. The murmurs died. No one moved. "Did you hear that?" a voice whispered. The silence deepened, shivering, brittle. Then, all at once, every head in the circle turned, not one after another, all together, too fast, too clean, like marionettes jerked on the same string. Dozens of blank eyes, glinting in candlelight, fixed on the dark where I crouched. For a heartbeat, the whole room held its breath. Then the realtor's voice, soft as velvet, closing like a coffin lid. He is here. Adrenaline seized me like a hand on my spine. I lurched upright and bolted, some skinning my arms as I tore down the passage. Behind me came the shuffle of shoes on earth. Not frantic, not clumsy, but steady. Too steady. Dozens of feet striking in perfect unison, every step slamming the chamber like a drum beat inside my skull. Then the voices followed, slipping between the rhythm of their march like oil through cloth. "Don't run," one said, hollow and even. "We don't want you hurting yourself." "Everything will be okay," crooned another, the syllables thick and honey slow. The tunnel pressed in tighter, my vision strobing at the edges. I dropped to my knees, palms skidding on damp stone, groping for the slit of light I swore had been there. My basement, my way out. Behind me the footsteps never faltered, filling the space, filling me. Their march in my blood, now one deafening rhythm, a heartbeat not my own. I shoved a shoulder into the gap, bone grinding against rock. The stone tore at my clothes, bit into my skin. For a moment I was wedged, ribs caught, lungs clenching, the earth holding me fast. The voices drifted closer, weaving between each other like a lullaby. Come back. You don't have to be afraid. I clawed forward, skin peeling, breath shredding in my throat. My hips caught next, and I had to twist, spine screaming, until the stone finally released me with a soundless escape. I spilled through at last, sprawling across the cold slab of my basement floor. The sting of torn flesh sharp in the air. Behind me the voices did not raise or falter. They seeped through the crack as though the wall itself were speaking, steady as a prayer. I stumbled up from the basement, clawing for balance, crashing through the kitchen and down the hall. Every breath was a rasp, every step dragging a streak of grit and blood across the floorboards. The door loomed before me, simple, familiar, absurd in its ordinariness. The frosted glass glowed faintly, a pale imitation of daylight, safety, escape, life. I seized the knob with both hands, slick with sweat and blood. It turned, yes, it turned like it always had, but when I pulled, the house answered. Clack. Not the dull, human sound of a deadbolt. No, this was sharper, metallic, hungry, a sound like teeth closing around bone. The seams along the frame shuddered, the wood moaned, fibers tightening like sinew, as if the whole house clenched at once to hold me inside. No, no, no. My own voice came back at me, ragged and unrecognizable. I rushed back to the basement door and threw the bolt, then dragged a shelf into place, books and tools crashing to the floor in a rain of useless clatter. For a moment, silence. Only my pulse in my ears. Then, the sound of the knob turning, softly, patiently. A creak, then a slow knock. 3 measured raps. Murmurs from behind the wood, sweet and stale. Don't lock us out. We all belong here together. Panic clawed higher in my throat. I staggered through the hall, into the kitchen, grabbing at the back door. The knob twisted beneath my palm, but the same click followed, the wood tightening as if bracing itself to hold me in. A shape caught my eye, motion at the window. I turned. Across the yard, my neighbor was stepping from his porch, stiff and deliberate, eyes fixed on me. Then another, and another. They crossed the lawn without a sound, gathering along my house. They pressed themselves to the windows, every one of them, palms spread flat, faces leaned close, cheek to pane. Their eyes stared through at me, unblinking, catching the faint light and strange reflections that looked too bright, too wet. A dozen mouths moved at once, muffled by the glass, whispering things I couldn't make out, but all of them smiling, all of them watching. The whispers overlapped, swelled, some voices turning sharp, almost scolding. Stop it, stop it. Our Lord won't be happy with you. Others curled into a cloying sing-song. Don't worry, sweetheart. You're safe here. We'll take care of you. The house vibrated with it, the glass humming faintly as their breath fogged the panes. Smiles stretched too wide, too steady, splitting into snarls and croons. I stumbled back, heart hammering, staring at the impossible wall of faces around me. Every window on the first floor was filled. I was sealed inside, trapped in my own house, their voices clawing at me from all directions. Panic seized me. My eyes shot upward. The stairs, the bedroom. I bolted, 2 steps at a time, my body lurching forward as if chased by the noise swelling below. I burst into my room, chest heaving, and grabbed at the curtain. Outside, my car parked at the curb. My only chance. For a moment I froze, the chanting rising beneath me, swelling into something that wasn't words anymore, just a pressure in my skull. Then I drove my heel into the glass. It shattered around me in an explosion of cold shards, the afternoon air slicing my face. Without another thought, I hurled myself forward, down onto the pavement. The pain was immediate, white hot, snapping through my leg like fire. My ankle folded under me with a sickening crack. I screamed, or thought I did. The sound drowned in the roar of blood in my ears. I rolled onto my side, vision warping, breath hitching against the shock. The night smelled of iron and dust. My face wet where glass had sliced it. Move, move. My car loomed just yards away, unreal and shining under the streetlight. I clawed across the lawn, dragging my useless legs, grass slick beneath my palms. Every shift of my weight sent agony screaming up my body, but the chanting from the house was louder now, echoing out through the broken window, their voices a chorus spilling into the night. Come back. You're safe with us. Don't run. He's waiting for you. I hit the curb, fumbling at my pocket. Keys slick with blood. Somehow I got them into the lock. Somehow I turned. The handle gave and I dragged myself inside, collapsing against the steering wheel, gasping, the horn blaring once in a long, muffled note. The house behind me pulsed with voices, calling, pleading, demanding. Then the sound changed, no longer steady, no longer coaxing. It broke apart. Ragged sobs, hiccuping wails, voices tearing themselves raw, some keen like children, others moaned low and guttural, as though their throats were splitting under the strain. And their mouths? God, their mouths. Lips quivering, stretching too wide, some grinning, some crumpled into masks of grief, every face vibrating with need. The voices overlapped until words were nothing but noise, then reassembled, jagged and broken. Our Lord needs you. Our Lord needs your body. What will our Lord do without you? Some shrieked it high and thin, others crooned it like nursery songs, syllables slurring through their sobs. It was a chorus of grief, of hunger, of worship, a sound that didn't belong in human throats. The nearest neighbor pressed her face against the windshield, teeth bared in a rictus that was half a smile, half a sob. Her breath fogged the glass in frantic bursts, and she dragged her tongue across it, leaving a wet smear that ran down like tears. Don't leave us. Don't leave him. Don't leave. Their wailing rattled the street, a dirge swelling until it shook the engine itself. I twisted the key. Once, twice. My ankle throbbed like fire, the pain snapping my vision white, but I forced it again. The engine coughed, sputtered, then roared. As I slammed the pedal, the car lurched forward, wheels thudding over bodies that broke apart too easily, like brittle effigies stuffed with wet leaves. In the rearview mirror, they collapsed to their knees, clawing at the pavement, arms outstretched, their cries echoing after me. Not anger, not threat, just a howling, endless grief. I didn't stop driving until the houses thinned, until the highway signs gave way to the smear of city lights. Every throb of my ankle was a reminder that I wasn't dreaming. I pushed until the tank hit red and found a cheap motel off the interstate, the kind with buzzing neon and a clerk who didn't bother to look up. For 3 nights I barely slept, curtains drawn tight, TV humming low. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the glass, the mouths, the way their palms pressed against me like the house itself was breathing. I lived off vending machine snacks and the emergency cash I'd crammed in my glove box months ago and forgotten. On the 4th morning, I couldn't stand it anymore. My leg was swollen purple, every nerve screaming, and I knew I had to tell someone. Anyone. The police station was fluorescent and humming, antiseptic in a way that almost calmed me. I stood at the counter, swaying on my good foot, and when the officer asked what was wrong, the words tumbled out. There were people. They were at my house. They wouldn't let me leave. They knew my name. They said things about a lord. I think they wanted to sacrifice me to it. My voice broke. I gripped the counter, knuckles white, trying to steady my breath. The officer gave me that look, the careful, measured one they must practice for drunks and lunatics. And then my gaze shifted just for a moment to the badge on his chest, and I froze. The badge gleamed under the light, sharper than it should, every line too clear. I'd seen them before. Hell, maybe this one had always been like that, but looking at it now, it seemed wrong. Too perfect. Too deliberate, each point cutting the air like a blade. Was it? My throat closed. I forced the words out. Was it always a 7-pointed star?